Welcome to the White Path. The White Path Essentials is where you will begin your content creation journey. The courses within this category are taught using Adobe Premiere Pro, which is a paid subscription service. I acknowledge students may not be able to pay for this subscription service, which is why further into this category, you will find a course using a free editing service called CapCut. I recommend all students to learn the entire category regardless of which video editing software you'll be using, simply because of the creative knowledge explored. Remember, the editing software you use is a tool. It does not make your creation, rather your creativity is what matters. Your learning should be structured in this manner. Learn 5 lessons per day by putting those lessons into action. Download content online using some form of online media downloader. Practice and begin creating your own content. Welcome to the Content Creation Essentials. In this very first lesson, I want us all to get familiar with the editing software that I'll be using to teach you content creation. Now, throughout these modules, I'll be using Adobe CC. This is the industry standard and is what I recommend for all of you to use. However, a lot of the principles I'll be teaching can be applied to multiple editing softwares, such as Final Cut Pro, DaVinci Resolve, and CapCut. Let's hop over to my screen and let's familiarize ourselves with the user interface. The very first thing I'm going to do is load up Premiere Pro. The first thing you'll be greeted by is a mini learning center. You can go ahead and watch some of these resources. However, I do find that a lot of the Adobe tutorials tend to be quite laborious, so I'm just going to quickly click off that. And this is the main interface. So what we want to do is create a new project, which you can find over here in the left hand corner of the screen. You can also click in the middle where it says create new project. There's some options in the bottom left hand corner if you're working with Teams, but we won't explore that yet. And as I previously mentioned, there's also the learning hub for Adobe. But yeah, let's go ahead and create a new project. So I'm just going to click new project on the left hand screen. Now that you're on this interface, the very first thing you want to do is go ahead and name your project. So I'm going to be calling this CC Essentials. On the left hand side, you can see your local files. So if I was to just click download, I've got 2 Andrew Tate files, and if I was to hover over them, I can scrub through and see these files. On the right hand side, you'll also see import settings. You can copy media, new bin, create new sequence. I'm gonna just quickly click off new sequence. We'll do that once we're in our user interface of our project. Next to the project name, you'll also have the project location, and you just want to go ahead and choose your location where you plan to save your project. So for me, I'm going to save this in the downloads in a folder I've created specifically for this course, CC Essentials. Hit choose, and there we go. I've got my project name and my project location. What I want to do is show you one method of importing your assets. So if I was to click both of these and hit new bin on the right hand side, and I'll actually name the bin Tate Assets, I can now go over to the bottom right hand corner of the screen and click create new project. So I don't want you to get overwhelmed by this user interface. We will get familiar with this workspace and how you can utilize each individual panel. Now, depending on what version or what editing software you may be using, the interface may be slightly different, and it could also be different at the time of you watching this depending on what updates come out. However, as a general rule of thumb, Adobe Premiere Pro has never really shifted away from this panel structure. So I'm just going to close this learning panel down by hitting the burger bar and hitting close panel, and this will be your core workspace area. Now, as you can see, there's already a file, or the correct terminology for this is a bin, and if I was to double click in that, I've got the 2 videos that I selected at the start when creating this project. Now, you may not necessarily want to do that, because if you've got a project that's full of videos, audios, music, and you import them all under one bin, it may not necessarily be organized in the way that you want to edit your project. In the top left hand corner, we have the import, edit, and export workspaces. However, we don't need to worry about that just yet. Edit will be the main workspace that we will be playing around in. You don't always need to go back into the import screen to bring a file into Premiere Pro. Over in the edit tab, within this bottom left hand corner, we can see our project. So it says there project CC Essentials. If I just click that tab, what I can do is double click in this space, which I'm going to do now, and this will open my Finder or my documents, and then from there I can go back into downloads and I can choose the 2 files that I want imported in, hit import, and there you have them. Both the files have been imported. So this is generally the way I import files, and then from there within Premiere Pro, I will organize my files how I want them. It's also worth noting you can toggle between a list view at the bottom right hand corner or a icon view depending on your preference. So there you have it, a really quick and easy lesson. I just wanted you to get familiar with the user interface of your editing software, and in the next lesson we'll start looking at orientation. Welcome to the lesson on orientation, and what I want to do is try and explain some of the panels, some of the workspace that we have within Premiere Pro. The best way for me to do this is to load an existing project, and I think going forward majority of what we will be doing I will do in this particular project. So the very first thing is I want to close this project itself, and to do that I can go into the project panel. I can either click on the burger bar or I can right click and I can hit close project. This will bring us back to a familiar screen which we seen in the previous lesson, and I can either open project on the left hand side. However, in the home section I've already opened the project previously, so here I can see my recent projects. I'm just going to go ahead and click on TRW Add. This has now loaded one of my projects. I don't want you to feel overwhelmed. I'm going to try and just briefly touch on particular areas, and then from there we're going to deep dive into this project and I will teach you everything you need to know to create a project just as good as this. So before we get started, let's actually watch this video that I created.
Life as a man is not a walk in the park. It's like a video game. You start from absolute nothing. You start from zero. You have no intrinsic value. It's up to you to level up your skills. You work on your fitness, your fighting skills. You work on your finance. You make sure you become important. You have to do something so you're not just the average Joe Schmo. You have to do something to become a force to be reckoned with, capable of defending yourself and your family and carving out a reality which is worth living in the world today. You grind, you hustle, you build your money-making skills until you're not just getting by with a 9-to-5 boss telling you what to do. You become rich and influential. You become a real player in the game of life. You start this game solo, but you can't win it alone. You need a team, a crew that's got your back, who pushes you to be better. No one in history has ever achieved anything important by themselves. Every fighter had a coach. If you went to the moon, NASA was on the ground. You always had somebody supporting you. You had to be part of a team. As the levels of the video game progress, you need higher attributes. You need better qualities of your character to succeed and pass the levels, and life is absolutely no different. You do not have time to waste. You must increase the capability of your character. You must become a better version of yourself, because the game is only going to become harder. That is why you're inside of Hustlers University.
So before we get started, it's worth mentioning that I work on a Mac. Therefore, majority of the shortcuts I may use will be Command plus whatever shortcut. For Windows, it's usually Control. For any shortcuts you might get confused on, please feel free to Google them. However, I'm going to try my best not to use any shortcuts and just dub things down completely. So that's a bit of a disclaimer. Let's discuss workspaces. So if you go over to the top right hand corner of your project, you can see this button here that says workspaces. If I click that, I have different workspaces that I can toggle between. So for example, I can go into assembly. You can see the project workspace is the main focus on assembly. You can go into editing, which is more in relation to the source area or the effects control area panel, or you can go into color. You can also go into effects and of course audio. Now, I don't want to confuse you, but within the lessons, we will look at different workspaces and how I utilize them when I'm doubling down on a specific thing within a project. Me personally, the bulk of my content creation I do in default. So what do I mean by default? Default for me essentially is having all the panels available for me to jump in and out of particular things within my edit. So there's two ways of doing this. Again, you can go back up to the right hand corner, click workspaces, and you can go down to all panels, or the other way of doing it, which is what I actually do, is hit window, workspaces, and then at the top here you can see all panels. I'll just go ahead and click that, and there you go. This is my general workspace. This is how I conduct my edits. In this workspace, there's 5 key panels. The first is the project panel, which is over here on the left hand side. I went over this briefly in the previous lesson. So at the top, you'll have your project, you have libraries and media browser. We don't necessarily need to go in them because I never actually use them. The only thing you should be concerned with is your project, in this case TRW Add. You can move this around by dragging the title in the position you want, and within the project box itself you can double click any area where where there's some space, you will have your Finder load up where you can select whatever assets you want and import them. There are particular tools you can use within this project panel that can help you organize your project much better. And this is something I'll be taking you through in the next lesson. So moving on to the next panel, which is the timeline panel. To the left of the timeline panel, you'll have this bar, which basically contains some of the quick tools that we'll be using throughout this module. The timeline itself is separated into two sections. So you can see this dividing line here. Above this dividing line is all your video assets, and below this is your sound assets. And again, I'm not going to confuse you by deep diving this. We will get into everything properly. So your timeline is where you build your project. You have a timeline indicator here, which you can scrub through your footage. And if you want to play, you can hit spacebar, which will show you a preview of your current edit, which then leads me nicely onto the program panel. So the program panel here, it will show you what your current timeline looks like, what the edit looks like. And there are a couple of cool features on here, which I'm not going to go into just yet. Then brings me onto the left-hand program panel. You'll see a few options at the top. However, the only ones you really need to concern yourself with at this moment is source and effects control. So source will actually show you your footage from your project panel. So I'm just going to double click on one of the assets I have imported into this project. Now you can see this source file and it will show you the complete footage that you have imported. Next to the source, you'll have effects control. Your effects control relates to the clips you have in your timeline. So for example, if I click this clip here, you have a set of options that have appeared in the effects control. If I click another one, you'll see more options, and so on and so forth. This is the area where you will adjust particular effects on your clips. Now, all the way to the right hand side of the user interface, you will see multiple options. I wouldn't necessarily worry about this too much. The only options you tend to use within this space is FX, Essential Graphics, maybe Essential Sound, maybe Lumetric Color. But again, further on into the lessons, I will show you how I navigate this panel. Now, I'm aware that not everybody will stick to the default layout. They may want to move particular panels around. Now, in order to do this, you basically want to hold down on the title of the panel. So let's just take program, and you can move this wherever you would like on your user interface. So you can see the purple highlighting. Let's just say I want to move this next to the project panel, and I pop that in there. There you have it. I have now moved the panel. You also can readjust the size of panels. If you hover between two panels, you can click and drag and readjust. However, this is not something I necessarily play around with, just simply because I like to work in default. And you'll find that throughout these lessons, I genuinely always revert to default settings, simply because wherever I may be in the world, wherever I may need to edit, I know I'm familiar with default settings and I can just get straight in without having to go through the whole process of reorientating my project. So there you have it. That's the lesson on orientation. Again, I know it can feel daunting for those who are new to the content creation sphere, but not to worry. As we progress through each lesson, we will get familiar with all that is offered in each workspace.